Okay, everybody, we are in the thick of winter and we want a cold weather movie to get us through. And this movie, usually you see people watching it during October, Halloween time, because it is a scary movie, but it's a psychological scary more than a get you scary. So my suggestion this week for your movie of the week is from 1980. It is the movie The Shining. This movie is directed by the great Stanley Kubrick. It is loosely based on the Stephen King novel, The Shining. Famously, Stephen King is not happy with this version because of how far it strays from the book. It stars Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance, Shelley Duvall as Wendy Torrance, Danny Lloyd as Danny Torrance. We have Scatman Crothers as Halloran, Billy Nelson as Ullman, Philip Stone as Grady, and Joe Turkel as Lloyd. So the basic concept of this story is it is about a family who is, the father is hired as a caretaker of a resort that shuts down during winter. It is in Colorado. It is isolated. The snowfall is very heavy, so it gets shut off from the world. And Jack is a writer. He takes this job because he will have time to write with all of the isolation, just him and his wife and his child. And from the isolation and some of the spirits in the hotel, madness ensues. And his child, Danny, has a gift of the shining. And his tortured wife, Wendy, through this thing, is there to basically witness the descent into madness of her husband, as well as the horrifying of her child. Today, this is considered a modern masterpiece of psychological horror. When it came out, it was kind of received by mixed reviews, even nominations of Razzies, which is synonymous with the movies that get nominated and an award for being terrible. But like I've said, oftentimes is as time passes and people look at the movie again, it is realized for the true classic that it is a masterpiece in suspense and building tension. Going over, Shelley Duvall at the time got nominated for a Razzie for her performance as Wendy Torrance, and now it is considered one of the greatest female horror performances. Jack Nicholson, in fact, has said in interviews that he considers Shelley Duvall's performance one of the greatest of any actress that he has ever worked with, taking on such a psychologically torturous role and what she went through making this movie. And speaking of what she went through making this movie, it is no secret that Stanley Kubrick was not kind to her while making this movie. His tactic of what he believed getting the best performance out of her for what he wanted to see of Wendy Torrance. And Shelley Duvall says that she would never want to go through this again, but looks back fondly on the experience because of the picture that she made, or they all made together, and the masterpiece that came out of it. Which has been said oftentimes about movies where you had the tyrant director who tortured crew and actor, but they appreciated the whole experience for what it was because of the art that came out of this. And I think people nowadays tend to forget that filmmaking is an art. I'm not excusing anybody's bad behavior or saying anybody should act like this on a movie set. But in the end, when you're an artist and you make a masterpiece of art, what you went through to get there, looking back on it, doesn't seem that bad. Would you want to go through another experience like that? No. But you appreciate the experience for what it gave you in the end. The other person who was personally tortured and brought to tears by Stanley Kubrick, is Scatman Crothers. I believe Slim Pickens is who Stanley Kubrick originally wanted for the role, and Slim Pickens refused. He had worked with Stanley Kubrick on Dr. Strangelove and did not want that experience again, and so he refused. Jack Nicholson is the one that convinced Stanley Kubrick to see Scatman for the part of Halloran, and he ended up being cast in the role. But Scatman was not known as an actor. He is a musician, but Stanley Kubrick just put him through take after take after take. Grueling yelling would bring him to tears. Scatman Crothers would never want to do this again also, but made a great film in the end. But a lot of the behind the scenes happening of this movie has been looked back with a critical eye nowadays. It is not acceptable, or deemed not acceptable by a lot of people, which rightfully so, to treat people like this when you're making a movie. I mean, Shelley Duvall was so tortured she would have panic attacks, suffered illness, went near a nervous breakdown, was losing hair and everything during the making of this movie, which, yes, does feed into her performance as Wendy Torrance. But was it necessary for the performance? I mean, we'll never know. I don't condone making a movie like this, but it gave us the movie we have. And although a lot of has been made of Shelley Duvall's mental state nowadays and what the making of The Shining might have brought into this, she has been exploited a lot by people nowadays who have talked about her mental stability and shown her in not a good light, and she has said that that is manipulated and that she is actually doing quite well and that she felt taken advantage by all of that. But also there's been behind the scenes documentaries of The Shining and everything where people actually have gotten to see the treatment that went on during the film set. And like I said, you don't want to excuse it, but that's kind of how things went those days, where the director was king. People lauded their brilliance of directors like Stanley Kubrick, and they really got to do whatever they wanted without a lot of people checking up on them, let's say. But one thing that did happen is that Danny Lloyd, who played Danny Torrance in the movie, he was actually insulated from even knowing what type of movie he was making, or seeing or perceiving the horror scenes. And that was made so by Stanley Kubrick, who made sure Danny wasn't to go through any psychological torture. So he took advantage of the adult actors and did whatever they wanted to, and made sure Danny Lloyd didn't experience any of that. Like I said, he didn't even know he was making a horror film or what was going on. He was told what to do. He did it, and the kid had absolutely no idea what was actually going on and what horrible things might have been taking place around him, or how the movie turned out. And on the other side of Kubrick's obsessiveness, his relentless take after take after take drive to get the perfection that he wanted in not only the performances, but how things looked. Like the scene with the blood coming out of the elevator doors, that was taken several dozens of times to get it just right, to get it to look like blood. This caused the movie to be one of the longest movie shoots in history. It actually delayed other movies that were to take place in the studio that they filmed at. I think Reds was one of those movies that was delayed because of it. Because not only that, Stanley Kubrick wanted to shoot the movie in order, so they built all of these sets and had to have them on hand the whole time So at the studio, the whole studio was taken up by the sets of The Shining. And although Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson got along really well, as opposed to the other people getting along with Stanley Kubrick, he did also drive Nicholson to exhaustion. He was in a relationship with Angelica Houston at the time. They were living together in London while this movie was being made, and she has described it every time that Jack came home at night, he didn't have the energy to do anything else. He would just fall in bed and fall asleep because of the physical and mental exhaustion of making The Shining. And going along with the fact that Stephen King doesn't like this version of the movie because of how it strays away from his vision of what he would want the movie to be, Stanley Kubrick actually rejected Stephen King's original script for The Shining that he wrote and went with his own vision and hired his own writer to adapt the novel. But Stephen King, years later, would go on and make a TV movie of The Shining, which follows the book more closely than the movie. To, mixed reviews. It's hard to make The Shining when everybody sees this story and sees the brilliance of this film, to make something that is the same but different and hold up to what is considered a masterpiece. On the note of Stephen King being able to make the TV movie, is Stanley Kubrick owned the rights to The Shining. So Stephen King had to go to Stanley Kubrick and actually license the rights of his own book from Kubrick. And one of the stipulations of the agreement was that Stephen King had to stop bad-mouthing the movie The Shining. And what makes this a good winter film? If you are familiar at all with the movie or the book, you know that this takes place in that isolated resort, which was originally inspired by Stephen King's stay at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, where he was basically the only person staying at the hotel. And the movie does center around a massive snowstorm snowing them in, so they couldn't get any help while Jack was descending into madness. So it gives you those cold vibes that are going on right now, so you can just embrace that and go more into the cold vibes and really feel it with watching this movie. Thank you for joining me again for another installment of Classic Movies of the Week. If you don't know, my name is Stacia, and I like old movies, and I like recording videos about them and sharing them with you. And what would really help me out is if you're watching this, if you like stuff like this, please subscribe to the channel. I'm looking forward to getting 100 subscribers and beyond from there. So yes, if you are living under a rock and somehow have never seen The Shining from 1980, I think this is in fact a wonderful time of year to watch The Shining, to go with the cold winter vibes instead of saving it for spooky season of October, and you get all of that cold psychological horror where the soundtrack comes in booming and helps with that feeling of dread in your heart while you're watching this cold movie and watching somebody descend into madness. So give The Shining from 1980 a shot. I promise you might like it. But see you next time, and I look forward to sharing some more movies with you in the coming weeks. But I love you all who have subscribed and all of you who are going to subscribe. But I love you guys. Bye.